Today we are ranking the easiest to hardest legends in Apex Legends, which actually means we're also ranking the legends that you may want to look at if you want either an easy, carefree experience, or if you are looking for a little bit more of a challenge to test yourself. But first, if you have not tried it out yet, you need to check out the sponsor of today's video, Outplayed. Downloading and using Outplayed lets you instantly and automatically record all or portions of your gameplay, select the games you wish to record from that 300 plus game library, the quality, and just let it do its thing. Outplayed removes the need for those pesky editing softwares and streamlines the entire experience of clipping, editing, and sharing your content. I'm continuing to review and comment on your clips in my Discord, so send them in and check out the link in the pinned comment and description for more. Big thanks to them for sponsoring the video. I am ranking the legends based on how hard they are to both approach as a less experienced player and how hard it is to unlock that top tier of skill or ability. If they are brainlessly easy, that's D tier, and if they are incredibly difficult to actually use and also succeed with, then that is going to be S tier. This doesn't, however, mean their power is per se S tier worthy in the traditional sense. We do start off with one of my favorite legends, not only to actually use, but also to recommend. This is going to be Loba at the straight D tier. There's honestly not a lot to know about Loba. Her passive requires zero skill or awareness. Her ultimate as well really requires next to nothing when it does come to placing it. The only slight skill involved would be understanding when to block a door or get a late game armor swap in there. Her tactical though is the only thing that might require a little minute amount of skill, but even then it's more or less just point and click since the bracelet does show you the trail anyway. Lifeline edges out Loba at D+, but much like the previous, she is also incredibly simple. Both her tactical and ultimate abilities are pretty much just simple placement abilities that require next to no thought. The only slight skill involved would be to just have the awareness to tell when your team might need some health from her tactical. The passive I do think is a little bit more of an ability that does require a little bit of skill, since reviving a player in the open is so bad to do, and you still need to have the positional awareness to stick with your team. Not much to say about Lifeline. She's very easy to use, both in terms of the approachability and of course hitting the top of her kit's skill. We now move into the C-tier legends, which are easy legends that don't have too much to know when it does come to the skill of them. The first is Ashe at C-. Ashe kind of requires some skill when it does come to her ultimate and passive, but it's not per se that tough. Really, she just needs some knowledge of where to place her phase breach, and for the passive, it's just having the map awareness to know where to go to avoid fights or confrontation, as the opposite is pretty simple. Just walk to the death boxes if you want some fights. Much like the other two abilities, her tactical I think does require some skill, but it's really just a tap it type of ability that does have a pretty low skill ceiling. Overall, Ashe is a pretty simple legend that really anyone can find some success with. We now have a legend who I actually have turned slightly around on recently, and this is going to be Octane at a straight C tier. Don't get me wrong though, all of Octane's abilities are actually brainless when it does come how to use them, as they are very simple. However, his abilities really do require a little bit of skill and knowledge to actually use them with effectiveness. I find a newish Octane that is not as initiated in terms of the kit can actually hurt themselves a lot and the team. Mainly this revolves around the stim, as using this ability once, or more specifically twice back to back, can actually be a pretty big deal that is going to cause some problems. But overall, it's not too bad, and Octane is a pretty easy pickup for any player. After Octane, we also have Fuse at the straight C tier. Unlike Octane, I do think Fuse's kit requires a little bit more to understand when and how to use it, but unlike Octane, his abilities are pretty much less of an issue if you are using them poorly. Nothing to really know about the passive, just throw grenades further and a little understanding when to sling those arc stars or switch the passive arm off to throw those vert nades. The tactical will require a little knowledge to know when to place his clusters and where to place them, but even then, it's such a minimal problem if you do get it wrong, as you do get 2 charges and they both come back pretty quickly. This ability is very forgiving. I do think his ultimate is actually the weakest part of his kit, and you can also mess up your squad quite a bit if you are lighting them on fire by slowing them down, but even this, I think it's pretty rare for this to actually happen, as it's really just a point and let it rip type of ability. Fuse is definitely a great legend if you are looking for an easy but effective legend. And the last C tier legend is going to be the legend, in my opinion, is the easiest, best legend in the game, and this is actually going to be Bloodhound at C+. The Hound is so simple but yet so effective, and much like the legends prior to Bloodhound, it's kind of just tap those scans and it just works. The only thing Bloodhounds really need to know about is just to know when to scan, but even this I find to be pretty forgiving. Sometimes the ultimate can get any Bloodhound into trouble if you are running at enemies like a crazy person, but all in all, Bloodhound is just so good and so easy to use. The legends who are approachable but are going to require a little skill to use effectively are the intermediate legends at B tier. Bangalore kicks us off at B-, which for me is pretty much borderline easy. Her passive pretty much requires no skill since it is activated by external forces. The tactical smokes and ultimate rolling thunder really just require an understanding of timing, and using them is pretty simple. I give Bangalore the intermediate rating mainly because a poor smoke placement or usage can be a huge problem for the squad, and clouding your vision to what is around you is a pretty big deal at times. A legend who I believe has some of the hardest abilities to actually use with successfulness is going to be Revenant, also at B-. He only gets the easy tier rating because I do think his kit is very simple in terms of its approachability. Higher climbing is simple, tactical orb silence enemies is simple, and an ultimate totem that you place on the ground to connect to give a free life is also simple. But using the passive of climbing and the ultimate death totem I do find to be pretty difficult these days, at least with successfulness. The passive requires a lot of understanding the map and knowing how to fight with a true flanking type of style in mind, whereas the totem I think is just straight up awful right now, and using it will more or less get you into trouble. I think the totem is honestly just like an upper A tier ability if we do look at really how hard it is to do well with it. After this, we do have Caustic locking up the B tier. Much like many before him, Caustic's kit is pretty simple, but I do think there is just as much you can do with both his gas traps and gas ultimate grenade that does make him more of an intermediate legend to really be successful with. There's also kind of a lot when it comes to just his actions per minute, since you really need to be constantly placing the gas traps down if you are taking fights. I also think understanding really when to use that gas grenade to push teams or get that clutch revive again makes him a pretty difficult legend to master. That puts him pretty much right in the middle of the pack. Much like the previous legends in B tier, we are also going to have Mad Maggie also at B tier because again, her abilities are simple, but when it does come to how they are used, she is a little bit harder to really be successful with. Mainly this does revolve around her tactical, as I do think it has a lot of playmaking potential to the point of where knowing to use the drill can be a fairly intermediate thing to learn. Similar to this, knowing when to drop the ultimate to push in or get a quick escape from those enemies can take a little bit of awareness. Mad Maggie certainly has come around since her inception, so if you do want a legend who fits pretty much straight in the middle in terms of the approach to skill required to excel with, she's a good option. There's a few legends that are borderline difficult to master at B+, and the first is going to be Seer. Seer fits squarely in the middle for me when it does come to both the ability to learn his kit as a new player and the ability to master it as a more experienced player. The thing that really does make him a harder legend though is really that it just requires so many actions per minute, as I like to call it. Basically, you need to constantly be aware and show a ton of attentionness to what is around by non-stop using that passive heartbeat sensor. Also knowing when to use the tactical is pretty important, and on top of that, the ultimate also requires a pretty good sense of timing and fighting capability, as Seer's ultimate really does require someone with good combat abilities to take full advantage of it. Similar to Seer, Rampart also requires a lot to really master her as a legend. She is very approachable as her kit is simple, but understanding where, when, and how to place her tactical amped walls down is actually a pretty difficult ability to master. She's going to require a lot as well when it comes to actions per minute, because placing those walls, picking up walls, using the turret, swapping guns, blocking doors, and so on means she is a very engaged and active legend. I think Rampart is a pretty great legend right now, but she can be fairly deceiving in terms of how easy she is to actually use with effectiveness. The final B tier legend is going to be Wraith at B+, who also is one of the legends at a borderline difficult tier. Wraith's kit is kind of like Rampart's, where it's simple on paper, but really it requires an insane amount of timing and awareness to use effectively, as that tactical does activate fairly slowly, and getting caught off guard could mean a swift death. As for her ultimate portal, this also requires a lot of skill not only to use it, but to master it, as the amount of ways you can use that portal is immense, and just knowing when to time it can be a pretty difficult ability. Overall, Wraith is a pretty intermediate legend that isn't the hardest to pick up these days, nor is the hardest to master. If you are enjoying the video, or if you just want to support me, do me a huge favor and hit the like button. It helps a ton, and I don't really say it too often around here, but if you want more content that is always on the way, subscribe to the channel. I greatly appreciate the support. The difficult to master and hard legends are up, but we actually only have a few to talk about. Let's kick it off with Horizon at A-. Horizon is arguably one of the best legends in Apex right now, but she definitely has a lot to her when it does come to how to use her abilities. Even her passive of increased in-air movement and maneuverability has some level of skill required to make the most of it. But it's really going to be her tactical gravity lift that has so much utility in nearly every type of environment, which also means its skill ceiling is quite high. And on top of this, the ultimate black hole is a pretty difficult ability to use with effectiveness. Even if it is a little weak on paper, Horizon is an incredible legend that is definitely not the easiest out there, but she's well worth it. Second to Horizon is going to be Watson at A tier. The first reason for this ranking is, of course, she's difficult to both pick up and master. She requires a lot of actions per minute when it does come down to using her fences, and not only this, understanding positioning is a must, and being able to set things up very efficiently and fast is going to be key. There's just a lot to know when it does come to using her fences, so the depth of knowledge with her kit is pretty high, and even knowing when to use her ultimate pylon could give some trouble, as a quick placement of this can be a pretty big deal. The second straight A tier legend is going to be Vantage, who does require a decent amount of skill to use successfully, although I think she is a fairly intermediate pickup. Mainly understanding movement with her and how and when to use her tactical is going to be the majority of what will give some trouble. However, also needing a good shot with her ultimate is a pretty determining factor when it does come to your success with her, so not only do you need to understand how to use her kit, it does rely on the player to have some good gun skill. Our final A tier legend is going to be Valkyrie, reigning in the A+ spot. This may surprise some, but I actually don't think she is super complex as a legend to get used to when picking her up for the first time. It really just comes down to knowing when to use her passive jetpack and that tactical, the missile swarm, as her ultimate is pretty obvious. But that being said, I think knowing how to use the jetpack and missiles with the most effectiveness is a little bit harder to do, and this is going to require some time on her to actually make her be very useful. As for the ultimate, this also requires a lot from the player to know where to go, and you need really good map awareness so you can fly from building to building, or get the high ground, or just have a safe rotation. Valkyrie is pretty great even after all of her nerfs, and she's an easy to pick up legend who is a little bit harder to master. S tier are the legends who I believe are the hardest legends in the game to actually use their abilities at a mastery level, and if not this, they are also pretty difficult legends to get used to as a newer or less experienced player. At an S-, we have one of my past favorite legends in Apex, and this is going to be Crypto. Crypto is pretty easy to approach, as really, you don't have a passive, and the ultimate is simply just the EMP to cause some damage that activates with a single press. However, that tactical drone is where it does give a lot of people trouble, as the amount that you can do with it is pretty steep. Picking up teammates' cars, reviving them remotely, reloading your weapon, seeing how many squads are around with the banners, scanning enemies in fights, reconning enemies, watching your back, and of course, aggressive EMPing through the drone, and ultimate or self-EMPing are some of the ways to use this kit. If you aren't really attentive or aware of your surroundings, this can be a problem, and I find that Crypto has a lot of work to do to actually succeed with him and not have yourself just be a liability in your squad. If you do want a challenge in an atypical recon legend with some aggressive playmaking, Crypto can be a good pick. The second S- legend is going to be my personal main at the moment, and this is Pathfinder. Much like Crypto, Pathfinder is another legend whose abilities are simple but pretty hard to master, and mainly this does come down to the grapple, but even the zipline can have some moments where you do need to have a good understanding of when and where to use it. The grapple, I do find, is something that does seem to be pretty easy, but in reality, it has so much that you can do with it, and even as someone with thousands of kills on Pathfinder, I still don't feel as if I have mastered every little bit of this grapple ability. I also think that picking up Path for the first time and using that grapple in more than just a simple pull yourself in one direction is pretty challenging. Pathfinder is a great legend if you want someone with a very high skill ceiling and a lot of complexity in a seemingly simple kit. Following up Path is our first and only regular S tier legend of Gibraltar. Gibby is all about timing, and I actually think when it comes to picking him up for the first time, he's more of an upper B tier legend. However, using his abilities with their full effectiveness is absolutely S tier worthy, and you need to have really good sense of urgency to save the team when you are about to take some big damage with that dome shield. Not to mention, using the ultimate at the right moment is pretty key since the timer is massively long. Not too much about the Gipster, just don't underestimate how hard it is and how much that you can do with him. We now have two legends at the top of the game when it does come to a player's ability to master them, and the first is going to be Season 13's Newcastle at S+. Newcastle honestly just requires so much attentiveness and action to really make his kit useful. Because of this alone, I find that Newcastle players need to be very active in fights, and even when you are supporting the team, to know when to move the tactical shield around or leap to the squad for help. It does take a little bit to get used to. And of course, when to revive your team and move them into safe areas, there's just a lot that you can do with Newcastle, which makes him a pretty hard legend to pick up and an even harder one to master. But that being said, I do think the approachability for a new player is not as difficult as some may think he is. And if you do want one of the most useful legends in the game, I think I would give him a try. We now have the moment every single Mirage main has been waiting for, his arrival in the S+ tier category, slotting himself at the top of the game. Mirage arguably and definitively, in my eyes, is the hardest legend to actually use with full effectiveness. Again, this does not mean per se that his kit is S tier worthy when it comes to power. In general, I have always stated that his skill is capped based on who you are playing against, but in some ways, I think that this can be fixed by the player having an insane amount of control over how he is playing Mirage and how they do interact with the clones. Mirage is very difficult to pick up and use with effectiveness for a new player, and even more so to master to the point where you're not just easily being discovered. His ultimate has a lot to it, and I think that the tactical is one one of the hardest abilities to really use with effectiveness, and not just being a boring basic just send it out in a type of way. There's a lot you can do to bait enemy shots, have them waste ammo, and you are returning fire just with the tactical. There's just a lot you can do with Mirage, and it's very hard to actually use his kit in a successful way. Let me know in the comments who your hardest legend in the game is, and be sure to check out this video to improve your Apex Legends skills so you can just simply not suck. Till next time, happy gaming.